Today I'm going to be telling a story that comes from a bundle of documents that were discovered in the archives at Chatsworth House just a few years ago. William Cavendish inherited Chatsworth in 1811 and became the 6th Duke of Devonshire. He was clever, sensitive, extravagant, quite deaf, and often very lonely. Despite being the most eligible bachelor in the country, the 6th Duke never married. Without a duchess, it fell to him to manage household affairs, including the hiring of servants. Sometimes he made successful choices, as in the case of Sir Joseph Paxton, who he hired to be his head gardener at the age of 23. Joseph Paxton went on to transform the gardens at Chatsworth and to design the Crystal Palace for the Great Exhibition in 1851. Sometimes, however, the 6th Duke made less successful choices. For over 50 years, Chatsworth was governed with a fair but firm hand by Mrs. Hannah Gregory, the housekeeper, who was described in local guidebooks as a trusted and confidential servant. She died in October 1843, which was quite inconvenient timing because less than 2 months later, Queen Victoria announced that she was coming to visit. So the Duke was in desperate need of a new housekeeper to get everything ready for her visit. Luckily, Mrs. Gregory had been training up her niece, Mary, to take over. However, for reasons known only to the Duke, he decided not to promote the assistant housekeeper, but to hire a barmaid from Buxton, and in quite a dramatic fashion. He wrote in his diary, "I left alone, and I drove in the wind and storm to Buxton, then at the great hotel informed Bickle of her destiny. She cried for joy and was very shrill." Now, we don't know much about this Bickle. She's a bit of an enigma. We know that her first name was Elizabeth, but not how she knew the Duke or why he trusted her with his favourite house. She is almost always referred to as Miss in the documents, which is quite unusual for a housekeeper. Housekeepers were almost always called Mrs. as a show of respect, regardless of whether or not they were married. So the fact that she is called Miss might suggest that she was quite young, as well as being inexperienced. What could go wrong? Well, at first, nothing. She impressed the Duke during the Queen's visit, and he took her on permanently. She also nursed a maid through typhus shortly into her employment, and while preventing an outbreak in the house. And she was quite good at generating money from visitors. In one day she could make up to £10, which was quite a lot of money. However, trouble was brewing. If you remember, I said that Mrs. Gregory had been training up her niece Mary to take over. Well, Mary appears to have given up on the idea of becoming housekeeper, and she got married and moved away. But her sister Sarah was married to the head gardener, Joseph Paxton, and she remained at Chatsworth, watching suspiciously from the kitchen gardens as a barmaid from Buxton took over from her beloved aunt. A bitter rivalry soon began. Elizabeth, inexperienced and eager to make an impression, soon got a reputation for careless spending. She bought silk dresses for all of the maids in her first year, and on one occasion she donated more money to charity than anyone else on the estate. Sarah watched her as she huffed and puffed around the house, startling visitors with her hurry, and she wrote to her husband, "I never knew a woman so thoroughly wanting of ballast in my life. Poor Duke, he has made a bad job of it, I fear." Sarah finally saw her opportunity to send away the housekeeper for good in 1846, after 2.5 years of simmering resentment. She wrote to her husband, who was down in London with the Duke, as he often was. And she said, "Will you believe me when I tell you that Miss B has had all the orange flower blossoms cut today and other fine flowers out of the conservatory for some dirty trumpery wedding at Manchester? Now what do you say to that? I am perfectly disgusted." The gardens were the Duke's pride and joy, so this was a serious accusation. While he and Joseph were pondering what to do about this, they received another letter, which, according to Joseph, sent the Duke into a terrific rage. It said that Miss Bickle had been entertaining her friends in the Duke's private apartments. The Duke's agent was immediately sent up to Chatsworth to take witness statements from all of the servants. The male servants were almost unanimous. "She is a notorious liar," they said. "She's been damaging books from the library and bringing all kinds of tag-rag into the house and showing the rooms that they're not supposed to see." The female servants, on the other hand, were much quieter. The maids admitted to hearing music and conversation, but no more, despite being interviewed several times. And this was not due to shyness, but to loyalty. One of them said, "I entirely devote myself to Miss B." Nonetheless, she was summoned down to London and dismissed, where she wrote 2 pitiful letters to the Duke. "Your Grace can never feel the utter misery I have endured, the temptations I have been exposed to, the envy and consequently hatred incurred by my situation." Presumably here she's referring to Sarah Paxton. The Duke felt sorry for her, but at Joseph's urging he didn't reply. Back at Chatsworth, more trouble was brewing. A new housekeeper, Mrs. Hasty, had been sent to take over. She was thought to be much more suitable, and Sarah approved. She wrote to her husband, "We took Mrs. Hasty to church. She was very nicely dressed." The maids, however, were not cooperating with their new mistress. They are not upon speaking terms, and there is nothing but skulking in corners going on, no work to be done, and everything 6s and 7s. 3 of them quit, but overall, in 1846, 10 female indoor servants left. To put that in perspective, that's over half of the indoor staff. Now, this is where the story gets quite exciting from my perspective. So Sarah downplays this incident as an upset, but what we have here is at least 3 female workers acted disruptively and then quit their jobs on a matter of principle in 1846. Now, the date here is possibly significant because at this time Chartism was in full swing. In nearby areas, in the Midlands, Yorkshire and Lancashire, workers were protesting, demanding more political rights for the working classes. And it's possible that the maids were influenced by these events. Maids were normally excluded from such things because 1, they were women, 2, they didn't live with husbands or fathers, and 3, they produced no vendable commodities. But the incident at Chatsworth suggests that the maids felt a kind of occupational solidarity that's rarely associated with their role. The country house is normally thought of as being a kind of multi-layered hierarchy, particularly in the 19th century. But what we're seeing here is glimmers of a 3-tiered community dominated by middling values of restraint and modesty. Sarah Paxton had personal reasons for disliking Miss Bickle, but when we look at the statements that she made, there are also wider Victorian ideals of class and gender at play here. She said, "Miss B never was nor never will be a proper person for Chatsworth, and it would be to the Duke's interest and every servant's comfort about the place to see her once again settled at Buxton in the bar of an inn where she came from." This is one of many statements that suggests a kind of tension between someone who feels like she has earned her status and a middle-class wannabe. From the 1770s, there had been a growing resentment towards what was seen to be ill-mannered and underbred upstarts who were seen to undermine the emerging 3-tiered social order. They were depicted in novels as tasteless and selfish aspirers. Think, for example, Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair, which was written in 1847. And this is how Sarah must have seen Miss Bickle, who she mockingly referred to as Madame or the Tigress. Tigress today might mean a strong, independent woman, but at the time it meant a woman who was vulgarly overdressed. Even worse, some people accused Miss Bickle of aspiring to fulfil the role of the Duchess. So not only was she seen to be emulating middle-class behaviour, but reaching for the aristocracy. Several witness statements said that she had been discussing with her friends which pianos in the house played the best, and passing around a book called Heath's Book of Beauty, which was a collection of poems, short stories, and portraits designed for the coffee tables of elegant ladies, not their delusional housekeepers. The incident of the scandalous housekeeper at Chatsworth was, for a time, the most popular topic of conversation at Chesterfield, and it even caused a stir below stairs at Devonshire House, the Duke's home in London. It's still notable today because it paints such a different picture of the country house than we're used to seeing in fiction. And for example, the orderly household of Downton Abbey, or the kind and wise old housekeeper of Pemberley in Pride and Prejudice, or even the sinisterly omnipresent Mrs. Danvers in Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. The housekeeper in this story is not old and wise, she's young and foolish. The maids aren't meek and deferent, they are headstrong and possibly even politically conscious. And the country house is not cut off from the rest of society, but it's influenced by national events, and even things that happen below stairs have ramifications that extend beyond the estate to nearby towns and even the capital. Thank you.